100 Best Photographs of the Beauties of the Wild West. They weren't just beautiful, they were bold, untamed, and unforgettable. Behind every faded photograph is a story of grit, charm, and rebellion. These were the women who lit up saloons, defied the law, healed the sick, and outwitted outlaws. Let's step back in time and meet the legends they never taught us in school. Fanny Porter. Some stories of the Old West begin with gunfire. Hers began with velvet curtains and whispered secrets. By the time she was just 20, Fanny Porter had transformed a modest San Antonio address into one of the most elegant and discreet bordellos on the Texas frontier. Known for lace-draped windows and polished glassware, her parlor offered more than pleasure. It offered sanctuary. Outlaws and lawmen alike crossed paths here, but it was said that none left with their secrets betrayed. And somewhere within those gaslit rooms, the legendary Etta Place first met the elusive Sundance Kid, a match born not of chance, but of Fanny's quiet orchestration. Ellen Watson. Not every outlaw carried a gun. Some wore suits, signed deeds, and passed silent judgments that cost innocent lives. Ellen Watson, remembered in history as Cattle Kate, wasn't a thief, but a determined woman carving out a life of her own on the harsh Wyoming frontier. Born in Canada, she chased freedom out west, but her independence was seen as a threat. In 1889, a powerful group of ranchers labeled her a rustler, a false charge used to justify her death. She and her partner were killed in broad daylight. Only later did the truth come to light. They weren't after cattle, they were after her land. Lottie Dino. What kind of woman could glide through a saloon with diamonds in her hair and leave a room full of men empty-handed and speechless? That would be Lottie Dino, born Charlotte Tompkins, daughter of Southern wealth, trained in cards by her banker father. When the war stripped her family of fortune, she turned to poker, traveling west to Texas. At Fort Griffin, her elegance masked a razor-sharp mind, and her winnings stacked higher than her pearls. They called her the Queen of Poker, but never dared call her bluff. Mattie Earp. Some lives fade between the lines of history, remembered only in whispers and aching silence. Mattie Earp, born Celia Ann Blaylock, once stood beside Wyatt Earp, sharing the dust of Dodge City and the uncertain promise of Tombstone. As fame found him, solitude found her. Battling chronic pain and the quiet pull of a medicinal escape, Mattie watched their connection unravel. Left behind in the heat of Arizona, she wandered to Pinal City. In 1888, her story came to a quiet close, marked not by headlines, but by the weight of a forgotten name. Susan Shelby McGoffin. What dreams drift behind the canvas of a pioneer's wagon? At just 18, Susan Shelby McGoffin left Kentucky's comfort for the wide, untamed West, pen in hand, diary on lap. Traveling with her older husband, a seasoned Santa Fe trader, she recorded not only the hardships of frontier travel, but also the soft poetry of open skies, buffalo herds, and native rituals glimpsed along the way. Her journal, graceful, observant, and startlingly honest, has endured as one of the earliest and most vivid first-hand accounts of the Mexican-American War era and life on the Santa Fe Trail. These ladies weren't just pretty faces. Who impressed you the most with their brains or bravery? Annie Oakley. She stepped from the Ohio woods with a rifle in her hands and fire in her eyes. By 15, Annie Oakley had already outshot Frank Butler, her future husband, and caught the attention of showmen across America. When she joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, her legend was sealed. Audiences gasped as she split cards edge on and extinguished candles with a single bullet. Small in stature but towering in skill, Annie traveled the globe, proving that greatness has no gender. Her aim was flawless, but her legacy hit even deeper. Calamity Jane. Back when drinks flowed freely and saloons didn't ask questions, Calamity Jane carved her name into Western legend. Boots dusty, voice loud, and heart wide open. Born Martha Jane Canary, she dressed like the men, rode harder than most of them, and cared for Wild Bill Hickok with every ounce of her untamed spirit. Folks say she'd treat the whole bar when someone hollered her nickname. She wasn't prim, she wasn't polished, but she was unforgettable, a chaos-wrapped heroine who lived fast, laughed loud, and never once apologized for it. Belle Starr. They called her the Bandit Queen, but no throne was ever as wild as the saddle she rode. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley. In 1848, Belle Starr galloped through history with confidence in her stride and legends at her side. She crossed paths with the James Younger gang, offered shelter in the shadows of Indian Territory, and was respected as much for her wit as her resolve. She wasn't just a rider or a rebel. She was a symbol of bold defiance wrapped in velvet, a frontier icon who blurred the lines between outlaw lore and elegance. Big Nose Kate. What happens when a brilliant, defiant woman crosses paths with the West's most infamous gunslinger? Mary Catherine Haroni, better known as Big Nose Kate, was no ordinary saloon girl. Fluent in 4 languages and fiercely independent, she met Doc Holliday in 1877, and from that moment, their lives intertwined like smoke in a poker room. Together, they roamed from Dodge City to Tombstone, where Kate managed a distinguished establishment known for its elegance and order. She wasn't just Doc's partner, she was a legend in her own right, blazing her name across the dust of the frontier. Victoria Woodhull. She didn't just challenge the rules, she rewrote them. In an era when women couldn't vote, Victoria Woodhull aimed for the highest office in the land, launching a presidential campaign in 1872 that stunned the nation. But that was only the beginning. Alongside her sister Tennessee, she shattered another ceiling by opening the first female-run brokerage firm on Wall Street. Fiercely intelligent, scandalously outspoken, and decades ahead of her time, Victoria fought for suffrage, free speech, and the right for women to choose their own destiny, loudly and unapologetically. If you enjoyed this trip through the Wild West, go ahead and hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories just like this. Josephine Earp. In the soft flicker of frontier lamplight, Josephine Marcus stepped into history, not with a pistol, but with poise. A New York girl with fire in her heart, she left home for the wild unknown and found love not on a stage, but in the quiet steadiness of Wyatt Earp. From Tombstone to Alaska, their bond weathered scandal, silence, and shifting towns. Josephine, elegant, fearless, endlessly loyal, became the keeper of Wyatt's legacy, urging him toward peace while fiercely guarding the story they built together. Margaret Molly Brown. What makes a woman rise not only from tragedy, but into legend? Before the world knew her from lifeboat stories, Margaret Tobin Brown had already carved a life of grit and grace. She built her fortune in Leadville's mines, but her true wealth lay in compassion. On that freezing night in 1912, she didn't just survive the Titanic, she fought for others, urging rescue and offering aid. Off the ship, she championed education, labor rights, and women's suffrage, all while turning heads in Parisian gowns and never apologizing for her strength or style. Mary Ellen Pleasant. In the rising dust of California's gold rush, a woman of quiet power built an empire and a revolution. Mary Ellen Pleasant, born into shadows of slavery, became one of America's first self-made black millionaires. In San Francisco, she opened bustling restaurants that served prospectors by day and funded the Underground Railroad by night. Her fortune wasn't just for wealth, it was her weapon. With unwavering resolve, she financed freedom, supported John Brown, and fought civil rights in court, leaving a legacy etched in justice and resilience. Mary Coulter. Could a building whisper the story of a canyon or echo the spirit of an ancient people? Mary Coulter believed so, and she spent her life proving it. As one of the very few women architects of her time, she infused stone and timber with soul. Her designs, like the Desert View Watchtower and Hopi House, didn't sit on the land, they belonged to it. With a poet's heart and an artist's eye, she honored native traditions, southwestern texture and natural form, forever reshaping how America saw and felt its western landscapes. Polly Pry. With a sharp pen and sharper instincts, Polly Pry carved her name into the rough bark of frontier journalism. As the Denver Post's first female reporter, she confronted injustice head-on, advocating for Alfred Packer's right to a fair trial and shedding light on harsh conditions at indigenous boarding schools like Fort Lewis. Her fearless reporting drew threats, and in 1904, she narrowly survived a violent attack. Undeterred, she launched her own paper, speaking louder than ever in a world that tried to silence her. Which one of these Wild West women would you want to hear more about in a full-story video? Let us know in the comments below. Lola Montes. She arrived like a storm in silk and scandal. Lola Montes, the Irish-born enchantress who reinvented herself as a Spanish dancer and electrified Europe with her undeniable presence. Kings were drawn to her, most famously Ludwig I of Bavaria, whose reign she nearly upended. But Lola didn't stop at royal courts and Paris stages. She blazed through the American West, captivating minors, defying convention, and championing women's independence. Her every step, whether on stage or in protest, was a bold rejection of the world that tried to tame her. Ada Isaacs Menken. How far can a woman ride the winds of scandal before she becomes legend? Ada Isaacs Menken, born of mystery in New Orleans, captivated the world with her fearless role in Mazeppa. Strapped to a galloping horse, veiled in theatrical illusion and daring grace, her performance blurred the line between art and spectacle, sparking both admiration and debate. But Menken was more than a sensation. She was a poet, a provocateur, and the highest-paid performer of her era, defying every boundary society drew with fire in her step and verses in her soul. Dora Hand. Beneath the moonlit skies of Dodge City, her voice drifted like a hymn across the prairie wind, soft, golden, unforgettable. Dora Hand, once a trained opera singer, traded New York stages for the rugged frontier, bringing grace and music to dusty saloons. Beloved for her generosity and elegance, she lit up the Lady Gay dance hall with more than just song. But one quiet morning in 1878, a tragic misfire ended her journey, cutting short a life that had only just begun to bloom. Klondike Kate. The icy winds of the north didn't stand a chance against the firecracker energy of Klondike Kate. With a swirl of red sequins and a voice full of sparkle, Kate Rockwell lit up Dawson City's saloons like a 4th of July sky. She wasn't just a performer, she was a sensation, famous for her flame dance that left crowds breathless and gold dust flying through the air. Hailing from Kansas, she followed the gold rush north and stole the spotlight wherever she went, proving that even in the coldest corners, joy could take center stage. Rose Dunn. She was barely more than a girl when she stepped into legend, courage in one hand and love in the other. Rose Dunn, nicknamed the Rose of Cimarron, captured hearts and headlines when she crossed paths with the infamous Doolin Dalton gang. Whispers say she risked everything to help her wounded sweetheart, George Bitter Creek Newcomb, escape during a standoff in 1893. Though her heart once beat wild for an outlaw, Rose later turned away from that dangerous path, choosing instead a quieter life, marriage, family, and the fading echo of frontier days. Laura Bullion. How does a young woman slip past lawmen, dressed in trousers and shadow, then vanish into legend? Laura Bullion, known as the Thorny Rose of the Wild Bunch, didn't just ride with outlaws, she outmaneuvered the system. With steely nerve and clever disguise, she carried messages, handled hidden goods, and moved through the underworld of frontier schemes. Often blending in by dressing as a man, she slipped through danger unseen. Her eyes, sharp as her wit, missed nothing. In a world shaped for men with guns, Laura carved her place with style, smarts, and a whisper of danger. Lotta Crabtree. With a sparkle in her eye and a banjo in hand, Lotta Crabtree lit up the dusty camps of California like a 4th of July firework. Trained by Lola Montes and adored by gold miners, she was dancing and singing her way into hearts before she was 10. By her teens, she'd outgrown the camps and was filling theaters coast to coast. But Lotta wasn't just a performer, she was a business genius. With her stage earnings, she built a real estate empire, invested in railroads, and became one of the richest and most beloved women of her era. We featured some incredible faces today, but did we miss someone iconic? Name her in the comments. Julia Bulette. Who truly sees the heart behind a velvet curtain in a dusty mining town? Julia Bulette, graceful and generous, walked that fine line between scandal and sainthood. Arriving in Virginia City in 1859, she didn't just charm the miners, she cared for them, nursing the sick during brutal epidemics and quietly funding the local fire brigade. Her beauty made her famous, but her kindness made her beloved. In 1861, crowned queen of the Independence Day Parade, she rode alongside the city's bravest, a living symbol of compassion in the raw chaos of the Comstock Lode's silver rush. Pearl de Vere. Bathed in gaslight and gold-trimmed silk, Pearl de Vere ruled Cripple Creek's glittering underworld with charm and command. At her lavish establishment, the Old Homestead, patrons paid handsomely for an experience of unmatched refinement, $250 then, a price for exclusivity and elegance. But Pearl was more than opulence. She demanded dignity for her staff, ensuring they were well paid, fashionably dressed, and given proper medical care. Originally from Indiana, she reimagined herself as Mrs. Martin and built an empire of allure. In an age of rough camps and coarse coin, Pearl created a palace and became legend for it. Mattie Silks. Who says a woman couldn't build an empire with lace, ledgers, and a bit of grit? Mattie Silks did just that, rising from humble beginnings to become one of the most influential women in Denver's high society shadows. Her market street parlor was a showcase of elegance, where velvet drapes met sharp business sense and high standards ruled the day. Mattie, striking in her blonde curls and steely blue gaze, dressed with purpose, her gowns always tailored with intent. One pocket for gold, the other for quiet protection. Behind every silk hem and satin smile was a woman running a finely tuned empire. Sarah Winnemucca. Beneath the vast Nevada skies, Sarah Winnemucca's voice rose not in anger, but in earnest hope for her people. Born into a line of Paiute leaders, she carried the wisdom of her ancestors and the burden of injustice with equal grace. Fluent in many tongues, she bridged the painful gap between Native nations and the U.S. government, serving as both interpreter and Army scout during the Bannock War. But it was in 1885 when she opened a school for Native children, teaching in both English and Paiute, that her true legacy began to bloom, one of preservation, dignity, and heartfelt defiance. Martha Hughes Cannon. Absolutely remarkable in every sense, Martha Hughes Cannon carved a path through history with boldness and brilliance. Born in Wales and raised in Utah, she rose from personal loss and hardship to become the first woman elected to a state senate in the United States in 1896. A trained physician and eloquent advocate for women's suffrage, Martha championed public health and civil rights at a time when few women had a political voice. In an unforgettable twist, she even triumphed over her own husband at the ballot box, proof of her intellect, courage, and unshakable sense of purpose. Abigail Scott Duniway. How far would you go to turn the tide of history in a world that told you no? Abigail Scott Duniway answered that challenge with unwavering fire. A bold voice in the American West, she founded the New Northwest in 1871, a newspaper that gave women's rights a permanent place in Oregon's public discourse. Her tireless campaign spanned decades, culminating in 1912 when women finally won the vote, and she was asked to draft the official proclamation. Through journalism and fiction alike, Abigail painted a future where justice wasn't just imagined, it was written into law. Pauline Cushman. She wasn't just an actress, she was a daring chameleon in petticoats, slipping behind enemy lines with a script no one expected. Pauline Cushman, born Harriet Wood in New Orleans, left the theater lights of New York for a much darker stage, the battle-scarred fields of the Civil War. In 1863, a Confederate offer to toast Jefferson Davis became her cue to enter espionage for the Union. Beneath her elegant gowns and charming smile, she carried sketches of enemy fortifications hidden in her shoes. Captured and facing execution, she was rescued just in time by advancing Union troops, cementing her place as a legend in America's secret war. Mary Halleck Foote. The distant clatter of mining carts, the scent of dust and pine, and the quiet strength of pioneer women. These were the textures Mary Halleck Foote brought to life. Trained as an illustrator in New York, she left behind refinement for the raw spirit of the American West, following her husband, a mining engineer, into remote frontier towns. Her writing, deeply observant and emotionally honest, revealed the trials and triumphs of Western women with rare grace. Alongside her vivid prose, her illustrations graced major 19th century publications, blending artistry with authenticity in ways that still resonate today. If you're still watching, type yes in the comments. Let's see who the real legends are. Susan Anderson. Could anyone have imagined that a quiet woman in a snowbound mountain town would become a legend of frontier medicine? Susan Anderson, affectionately known as Doc Susie, shattered expectations when she chose to practice medicine in the rugged isolation of Fraser, Colorado. After earning her degree in 1897, a rare feat for women at the time, she committed herself wholly to the people of the Rockies. From childbirths to epidemics, broken bones to heartbreak, her hands were always ready. During the devastating 1918 flu pandemic, her bravery and endurance saved countless lives and secured her place in Western history. Jennie Rogers. In the heart of Denver's Market Street, where velvet-lined whispers floated through gaslit corridors, Jennie Rogers rose not by charm alone, but through sharp vision and command. With $17,000 resourcefully secured from her past, she established the Mirror House, an elegant landmark where luxury met precision. Tall, poised, and coolly elegant, Jennie led with quiet authority wrapped in silk gloves. Her establishment wasn't just the most refined in town, it stood as a testament to her discipline, taste, and strategy. In a world governed by men, she crafted her own seat of power. Dora DuFran. She may have started out with nothing but grit and sharp instincts, but Dora DuFran turned the dusty frontier into her personal playground. Arriving in Deadwood as a teenager from Liverpool, she built a thriving business of lively establishments known for their energy and eccentricity. Legend has it, she even brought in cats to keep things tidy, sparking the curious origin of a term still whispered today. Quick-witted, bold, and always one step ahead, Dora was more than just a frontier entrepreneur. She was a legend and a trusted friend to Calamity Jane. Her story still purrs with personality, Josephine Airey. Could a woman running a saloon in the rough-and-tumble West also become one of its most beloved humanitarians? Josephine Airey, better known as Chicago Jo, proved it was not only possible, but unforgettable. Born of Irish roots, she made Helena, Montana her stage, where her lively establishment became a center of both entertainment and connection. When illness swept through town, she cast aside business as usual and opened her doors as a refuge for the sick. Known for organizing dazzling community fundraisers and caring for the vulnerable, Josephine became a vibrant symbol of generosity, equal parts satin and steel. Belle Brezing. Velvet curtains, whispered names, and a fortune built behind locked doors, Belle Brezing reigned over Lexington's most exclusive circles with unmatched command and elegance. At just 19, she turned scandal into strategy, launching a business that would captivate politicians, bankers, and even European travelers. Her opulent mansion on Megawan Street, opened in 1891, became a symbol of Southern luxury and secrecy. Far more than a businesswoman, Belle was a tastemaker, philanthropist, and cultural icon whose influence reached beyond Kentucky's borders. Her storied life is even said to have inspired Belle Watling in Gone with the Wind, a fitting echo for a woman who lived by her own rules. Diamond Lil. She dazzled like a chandelier in a smoky saloon, brilliant, untouchable, and impossible to forget. Born Eleonora Ornstein. In 1882, the woman the world would come to know as Diamond Lil Davenport didn't just live through the Klondike Gold Rush, she conquered it. With a sparkling diamond set proudly in her tooth and a wardrobe rivaling European nobility, she presided over one of Skagway's grandest venues. But it wasn't just the velvet drapes or champagne that drew the elite. It was Lil herself, witty, elegant, and utterly magnetic, leaving behind a legacy woven from charisma, silk, and sparkle. Which story from the Wild West reminded you of a modern-day celebrity? Drop the name below. Squirrel Tooth Alice. She strolled through Sweetwater with a prairie dog on a leash and a defiant gleam in her eye. Folks called her Squirrel Tooth Alice. But behind the odd nickname was Elizabeth Libby Thompson, a woman with a wild past and a reputation just as fierce. After rising from a troubled youth and shaking off the whispers of a judgmental world, Libby carved her own space in the Old West, dancing in Dodge City saloons and eventually managing one of the town's busiest establishments. Her eccentric love for rodents only added to the myth as she turned every room and every rumor into something unforgettable. Della Moore. How many hearts have wandered through time, quietly wondering what became of a woman like Della Moore? Once known across Fort Worth and San Antonio for her striking beauty and bold presence, she stepped into the pages of legend when she fell for Kid Curry of Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch. Their love unfolded in shadows and smoke, chased by danger at every turn. But when his story ended in 1904, hers shifted direction. Some say she walked away from outlaw life entirely, trading thrill for grace, returning to peace as a teacher with stories she never told. Nellie Cashman. Soft light often finds the kindest souls, and Nellie Cashman was one of them. A fearless immigrant from Ireland, she carved her path through the wildest corners of the American West, not only with grit, but with grace. Whether feeding starving miners in British Columbia or offering shelter to the sick in Arizona, Nellie led with heart. By the time she cast her vote in Alaska in 1912, one of the first women to do so, she had already redefined what it meant to be strong, compassionate, and free. Her legacy still warms the trails she once walked. Emma Albany. Velvet gowns shimmered under gaslight, and the notes she sang echoed with both elegance and defiance. Emma Albany, once celebrated as a virtuoso of the grand stage, chose to step beyond the formality of opera houses into a more intimate and expressive world. Draped in gowns, Worth a small fortune and adorned like royalty, she reimagined the art of performance, bringing arias to life with a richness that was both personal and profound. Her voice, once filling concert halls, now inspired awe in more refined, exclusive gatherings. In every note, she wove artistry into courage, beauty into boldness. Johanna July. How does a young girl raised among river winds and restless horses become a legend whispered across the Southwest? Johanna July, born into the Black Seminole community of Nacimiento de los Negros, wasn't just skilled, she was mesmerizing. Her connection to horses was almost spiritual, and by 1887, she had channeled that power into circus performances that left crowds breathless. With daring stunts, fluid grace, and unshakable poise, Johanna drew people from every walk of life, each captivated not just by her daring, but by the deep, wild energy she carried into the ring. Toby Riddle. Even in the shadow of war, one woman stood between chaos and compromise. Toby Riddle, born into the Modoc tribe and raised with the rhythms of her ancestral land, carved her place in history with unwavering courage. As tensions exploded during the Modoc War of the 1870s, she became a vital interpreter and peacemaker, risking everything to warn U.S. officials of a deadly ambush that would claim lives despite her pleas. Her bravery didn't fade with the battle's end. Instead, it earned her one of the first U.S. military pensions ever awarded to a Native American woman. And yet they pushed on. It's truly remarkable that those pioneers pushed westward, despite the incredible hardships they faced. The dream of a better life, the chance to own their own land, fueled their determination. Entire families, from grandparents to young children, embarked on these arduous journeys, hoping for a fresh start. They were the driving force behind westward expansion, ushering in a new era for the United States. However, this westward movement had devastating consequences for Native Americans. As settlers claimed land, Native American tribes were displaced and confined to reservations. Their way of life was irrevocably altered, often tragically so. This era was shaped by the concept of manifest destiny, the belief that America was destined to expand across the continent. And so it did, reaching all the way to the Pacific. The frontier opened up, leading to industrial growth and technological advancements like the Transcontinental Railroad. By the late 1800s, cross-country travel became significantly easier. But it was those early pioneers in their covered wagons who blazed the trail. Their journeys were incredibly difficult, filled with back-breaking labor and constant danger. Many didn't survive. Their story is one of incredible resilience and determination, but it's also a story of loss and displacement. It's a complex and important part of American history. Please comment 1 to let me know you'll be watching this video until the end. Hazards of the journey. Just how dangerous was the Oregon Trail? It's tough to say for sure. Like the total number of emigrants, death tolls are hard to pin down precisely. Estimates vary quite a bit. Some historians place the mortality rate at around 4 to 6% of all travelers. That translates to somewhere between 12,000 and 24,000 deaths. Other estimates go as high as 10%. What were the biggest dangers? Accidents and disease. Pioneer diaries frequently mention accidental shootings, injuries from encounters with animals, drownings, and deaths from exposure to the cold. Wagon accidents were also common, and tragically, children were sometimes seriously injured after falling under the wheels of a moving wagon. Life on the trail was precarious. Death was a constant companion, a stark reminder of the risks pioneers faced on their journey west. Disease was a constant threat on the Oregon Trail. Sanitation was a major challenge. Opportunities to bathe or wash clothes were rare, and clean drinking water was often scarce. Human and animal waste, along with garbage and dead animals, often contaminated water sources. Cholera, a waterborne disease, was the biggest killer overall. Diphtheria, another highly contagious illness, was the leading cause of death among children. Weakened by exhaustion and poor nutrition, pioneers were also vulnerable to typhoid, mountain fever, likely a tick-borne illness, dysentery, mosquito-borne diseases like malaria, food poisoning, scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, and alkali poisoning from drinking contaminated water. Measles, mumps, and smallpox also took their toll, especially on children. Childbirth also posed serious risks to women on the trail. The lack of proper medical care meant that even minor illnesses could quickly become life-threatening. Disease was a constant fear, and its presence cast a long shadow over the westward journey. We often see movies depicting circled wagons under attack by Native Americans, but in reality, conflict with Native Americans was relatively rare during the peak years of the Oregon Trail. Historian John Unruh's research suggests that fewer than 400 immigrants were killed in Native American attacks between 1840 and 1860. More often than not, interactions between pioneers and Native Americans were peaceful, even helpful. Native Americans often traded supplies with the pioneers, operated ferries, or assisted with managing livestock. While wagon trains did often circle their wagons at night, this was primarily to corral their animals, not to defend against attacks. In the rare instances when attacks did occur, wagons were typically in a line of travel, not a defensive circle. The Hollywood image of constant conflict doesn't reflect the more nuanced reality of life on the Oregon Trail. Sadly, many of the conflicts that did occur between pioneers and Native Americans were sparked by the pioneers themselves. Cultural misunderstandings, arrogance, and acts of violence against Native Americans, such as shootings, sometimes provoked retaliation. And often, this retaliation wasn't directed at the specific group responsible, but at the next wagon train that came along. After the 1850s, attacks on smaller wagon trains or individual travelers did increase. This rise in violence reflected growing Native American hostility towards white settlers who were increasingly encroaching on their lands. The relationship between pioneers and Native Americans was complex and often fraught with tension, and the increasing pressure of westward expansion exacerbated these tensions. The end of the Oregon Trail wasn't always a happy ending. Many pioneers arrived in dire straits. Some had run out of food and were starving. Others were sick and exhausted. Many were destitute, having lost their wagons, their belongings, or spent their last dollars on tolls. Fortunately, established Oregon residents often organized relief efforts. Charitable settlers would form pack trains and meet the new arrivals at the Dalles, providing much-needed supplies and assistance for the final leg of their journey. This aid was often the difference between life and death for those who had endured so much to reach their destination. While the journey west was full of hardship, it also revealed the compassion and generosity of those who had already made the arduous trek. The trail's legacy. The driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory, Utah in 1869, completing the first transcontinental railroad, signaled a major shift in westward migration. The era of the great overland trails was coming to a close, but the Oregon Trail itself had been evolving for decades. The California Gold Rush of 1849 brought a flood of 49ers, transforming the trail and its surrounding communities. The 1850s saw an increased military presence along the route, along with physical improvements like ferries and bridges. Steamboats began plying the Columbia River, offering an alternative to wagon travel for part of the journey. The 1860s brought even more changes. Settlements grew larger and more numerous. Communication improved with the Pony Express, and then the transcontinental telegraph. Stagecoach lines expanded, offering faster travel options. And after the Civil War, conflicts with Native Americans intensified in many areas. The Oregon Trail, once a remote and challenging path, was becoming increasingly integrated into a rapidly changing nation. The railroad may have marked the end of an era, but the Oregon Trail had already undergone a significant transformation. The new technologies of communication and transportation often followed the established routes of the Oregon Trail. Telegraph lines were strung alongside the trail, and railroad tracks were sometimes laid directly over its path. While the railroad didn't immediately eliminate wagon travel, it dramatically reduced the need for it. Of all the westward trails, the Oregon Trail remained in use the longest, partly because the railroad didn't reach Oregon until the early 1880s. Even after the railroads replaced most wagon train traffic, the Oregon Trail continued to serve a purpose. It became a major route for driving cattle and sheep eastward to market. The trail, once a path of westward expansion, now facilitated a different kind of movement, connecting the developing West with the established markets of the East. The Oregon Trail, though no longer a primary route for westward migration, continued to play a role in the evolving American economy. The Oregon Trail, as a continuous, traversable route, no longer exists, but its legacy remains. Traces of the trail are still visible today, offering glimpses into this important chapter of American history. In many places, you can still see the ruts carved into the ground by thousands of wagons. Near Guernsey, Wyoming, these ruts are particularly striking, worn as deep as 5 feet into the sandstone. Imagine the countless wagons that passed through this very spot, carrying hopeful pioneers westward. Names and dates carved into soft sandstone formations, like Independence Rock, still bear witness to the passage of these travelers. These inscriptions, made over a century ago, offer a personal connection to the pioneers who made this arduous journey. Many landmarks along the trail are now protected areas. Scotts Bluff National Monument and Chimney Rock National Historic Site preserve iconic formations that guided and inspired generations of pioneers. Historic forts, like Forts Bridger, Kearney, Laramie, and Vancouver, along with sites like the Whitman Mission, offer further insights into life on the trail. These preserved sites allow us to connect with the past, offering a tangible link to the pioneers who forged a path westward, shaping the nation we know today. Recognizing the importance of the Oregon Trail, the U.S. Congress established the Oregon National Historic Trail in 1978. The goal was to preserve and protect the trail's remnants and provide public access where possible. The National Park Service oversees the trail, working in partnership with the Bureau of Land Management and other agencies. Several interpretive centers along the route offer visitors a deeper understanding of the trail's history and significance. The Oregon Trail is also connected to other National Park Service sites, including Homestead National Monument of America in Nebraska, Fossil Butte National Monument in Wyoming, and Craters of the Moon National Monument and Preserve, and Hagerman Fossil Beds National Monument in Idaho. The trail even passes through sections of several national forests. These sites offer a broader perspective on the westward expansion, exploring themes of settlement, natural history, and the challenges faced by pioneers. By preserving and interpreting these sites, we gain a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices and triumphs of those who traveled the Oregon Trail, shaping the American West and the nation as a whole. The Oregon Trail hasn't just left its mark on the landscape, it's also become part of popular culture. Several movies have depicted the trail and the challenges faced by pioneers. In 1977, there was even a short-lived television series called The Oregon Trail. But perhaps the most famous portrayal of the Oregon Trail is the educational computer game. Hugely popular in the 1980s and 90s, the game introduced generations of students to the hardships and adventures of westward migration. And it's not just a relic of the past. The Oregon Trail game has been re-released in various digital formats, ensuring that new generations can experience this interactive journey into history. From movies to television to video games, the Oregon Trail continues to capture our imagination, reminding us of the pioneers who braved the unknown to forge a new life in the West. So, there you have it. Covered wagon travel, not exactly a luxury vacation. It was a grueling test of endurance, a constant struggle against the elements, and a roll of the dice with every mile. These pioneers faced incredible hardships, but their determination forged a path westward, shaping the American West as we know it. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything. If you enjoyed this video, consider watching other videos in this series. Don't forget to subscribe and share Who Remembers with someone you know. As always, thank you so much for watching. No horse culture here. We often associate the Great Plains with horses and horseback riding, and it's true, many Native American tribes became masterful horsemen, using horses for hunting, warfare, and transportation. American soldiers and explorers also relied heavily on horses. But one group was largely excluded from this horse culture: the settlers. For most pioneer families, owning a horse was simply too expensive. Horses were costly to buy and required significant upkeep. Settlers were already stretching their resources to purchase wagons, supplies, and provisions for their journey. A horse was a luxury they couldn't afford. Instead, they relied on mules and oxen. These sturdy animals were much more practical for the westward journey. Unlike horses, mules and oxen could survive on the rough forage found along the trail, making them easier and cheaper to feed. They were also stronger and more durable, capable of pulling heavily loaded wagons across vast distances and through challenging terrain. Mules, known for their sure-footedness, were particularly valuable in mountainous areas. Oxen, while slower, were incredibly strong and reliable, ideal for hauling heavy loads over long distances. They became the workhorses of the westward trails. Upon reaching their destination, settlers continued to rely on their mules and oxen for farming and other tasks. These animals became essential for building their new lives. Horses, while perhaps more glamorous, were simply not practical for the average pioneer family. Their reliance on mules and oxen demonstrates the resourcefulness and practicality that characterized westward expansion. What surprised you the most about the risks pioneers faced? Pack carefully. Imagine traveling for months in a wagon with no shocks, on roads that were barely more than dirt tracks. That was the reality for pioneers heading west. The ride was rough, to say the least. Prairie schooners, the most common wagons, were notoriously bumpy. Their tall, narrow design made them unstable, and the wooden wheels and axles offered no cushioning whatsoever. Every rock and rut sent jolts through the wagon. Passengers were bounced around constantly, for hours, days, weeks on end. Settlers tried to minimize the bouncing by packing carefully, placing heavy items at the bottom. But even with the best packing, the ride was still incredibly rough. And surprisingly, the prairie schooner was considered an upgrade from the Conestoga wagon. While larger and able to carry more, the Conestoga's size made it even more likely to tip over. Many trails were barely wide enough for the Conestoga, and its wheels would frequently slip off the track, making for a truly bone-jarring experience. To escape the constant jolting, many pioneers opted to walk alongside their wagons. But imagine walking for hundreds, even thousands of miles across that rough terrain. It was exhausting and exposed them to the harsh elements. So, it was a tough choice: endure the brutal ride or the grueling walk. Neither option was easy, and it highlights the hardships pioneers faced on their journey west. Bring gear for a breakdown. Imagine this. You're traveling across the country in a covered wagon, miles from anywhere. Suddenly, something breaks. No paved roads, no garages, no tow trucks. Just you, your broken wagon, and the wilderness. This was the reality for pioneers. Wagon breakdowns were a constant threat. The rough trails were brutal. Wooden wheels cracked and splintered on rocks and rough terrain. Axles snapped under the strain. Metal parts wore down and broke off. And when something broke, you were on your own. So, pioneers packed their wagons with essential tools: hammers, saws, axes, nails, anything they might need for repairs. They also carried spare parts, knowing that breakdowns were inevitable. But sometimes even the best preparations weren't enough. They had to improvise, using whatever materials they could find to make repairs. A broken wagon meant a halt to the journey. Families had to unload everything, a back-breaking task in itself. Often, they even had to flip the wagon on its side to access the undercarriage for repairs. All this while exposed to the elements, wild animals, and other potential dangers. Every successful repair was a hard-won victory, a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. They were their own mechanics, relying on their skills and resourcefulness to overcome these constant challenges. If you were packing for a covered wagon journey, what 3 modern items would you have to bring? Rain, rain, go away. Weather was a constant challenge for pioneers crossing the western trails. Those prairie schooners with their canvas tops offered some protection, but not much. The canvas itself wasn't waterproof. Settlers had to treat it to make it resistant to the elements. They started with heavy cotton duck canvas, usually around 10 ounces. Then, they'd coat it with linseed oil. This created a water-resistant barrier, protecting the family's belongings from rain and light snow. Once treated, the canvas was carefully draped over the wagon's frame and tied down securely. But even treated canvas wasn't foolproof. On the open prairie, wind was a constant factor. Rain rarely fell straight down. Strong gusts could blow it sideways, right under the canvas cover. And when it wasn't raining, wind often whipped up clouds of dust and sand, pelting the wagons and infiltrating every crevice. To combat this, settlers added a drawstring to the edges of the canvas. This allowed them to pull the canvas tight, creating a more enclosed space, like a giant hoodie for their wagon. It helped keep out the wind, rain, and dust, offering a little extra protection against the harsh elements. But even with these precautions, severe weather remained a constant threat. Rough river runs. Sooner or later, every westward-bound pioneer family faced a river crossing. Even though much of the West is dry, rivers and streams crisscrossed the landscape, posing a serious challenge. These crossings were tough on everyone: the families, their animals, and their wagons. Sometimes, at larger rivers, there'd be a ferry. But ferries weren't cheap, and most settlers couldn't afford them. That meant fording the river, driving the wagon straight through the water, a risky proposition. At smaller rivers, pioneers often had to improvise, building their own rafts from whatever materials they could find. If they were lucky, there'd be trees nearby, and they could lash together logs to create a makeshift ferry. The key was finding the right spot to cross. They needed a narrow section with a calm current. Once they found a promising location, they'd try to waterproof the wagon bed, coating it with wax and sealing any cracks. The wagon itself became a sort of boat, a very fragile one. Then, with their oxen straining, they'd slowly push into the current. A successful crossing was a huge relief, but it was always a gamble. If the current was too strong or the wagon too heavy, it could easily overturn, spilling everything into the river. Animals could be swept away. People could be injured or even drowned. River crossings were tense, dangerous moments, a stark reminder of the perils of the westward journey. 10 brutal facts about traveling the Old West in a covered wagon. Ever played the Oregon Trail game? Or maybe you grew up watching westerns with those iconic covered wagons rolling across the prairie. But how much do you really know about covered wagon travel? Before cars, trains, or planes, these wagons were the only way to reach the West. And it was a brutal journey. Months of hardship, danger, and discomfort. Forget romantic notions of pioneers galloping across the plains. The reality was far grittier. Get ready to discover 10 surprising facts about what life was really like inside those covered wagons. Months of misery. Covered wagon travel wasn't exactly known for its speed. On a good day, with flat terrain and favorable weather, a wagon might cover 20 miles. But that was the best-case scenario. More often, they averaged between 8 and 20 miles a day. Rough terrain, mountain passes, or bad weather could slow them to a crawl. Let's say you were starting in St. Louis, a common starting point for westward journeys. The straight-line distance to San Francisco is about 1,650 miles. Even at the optimal speed of 20 miles a day, that's still almost 90 days of travel. But that's just a theoretical calculation. In reality, wagons rarely maintained that pace. There were constant delays, broken wheels, sick animals, bad weather, difficult terrain. The actual trails were also much longer than the straight-line distance, winding around obstacles and adding many more miles to the journey. As a result, a trip from St. Louis to the West Coast typically took around 6 months. 6 months of grueling travel, exposed to the elements, with limited food and comfort. It was a dangerous undertaking. People got sick, injured, and sometimes even died along the way. Reaching the West Coast was a monumental achievement, a testament to the pioneers' resilience and determination. They paid a steep price in time and hardship for the chance at a new life. Could you imagine traveling for 6 months in a covered wagon? What do you think would be the hardest part? Wagon choices and limitations. When pioneers prepared for their westward journey, they had a couple of main wagon options. The most iconic was the prairie schooner, that classic covered wagon we all recognize. Large wooden hoops spanned the length of the wagon, covered with canvas to create a protective canopy. This canvas provided shade from the sun and a somewhat secure space to store belongings. It was the 19th century equivalent of a minivan, hauling families and their possessions across vast distances. And the name? From a distance, the curved canvas tops resembled the sails of a schooner ship, hence the nickname Prairie Schooner. These wagons were designed for those long hauls to the West Coast, but the journey was anything but comfortable. The other option was the Conestoga wagon. Larger and heavier than the Prairie Schooner, it was pulled by teams of up to 6 horses, but its size and weight made it unsuitable for long cross-country journeys. The Conestoga was better suited for shorter hauls, like moving from a city like St. Louis to the Kansas or Oklahoma territories. It was often used for transporting goods rather than families making the arduous westward trek. Regardless of the wagon type, travel was incredibly challenging. Forget paved roads. Pioneers followed rough dirt trails, often little more than rutted paths. Harsh weather could turn these trails into muddy quagmires. Broken wheels were common. Animals often became exhausted or injured, and wagons could get stuck, break down, or even fall apart completely. These wagons, while essential, were a constant reminder of the hardships of life on the trail. Sleep under the stars. It's easy to imagine pioneer families snuggling up inside their covered wagons at night. After all, there's a canvas roof, right? Seems like a natural shelter. But the reality was quite different. Those prairie schooners were packed to the brim with everything a family owned. And the space inside wasn't very big to begin with, only about 4 feet wide and 10 feet long. Think of a slightly oversized queen bed. Now, imagine filling that space with all your worldly possessions. There simply wasn't room for people to sleep inside. So, most nights, families slept outdoors. They might spread blankets on the ground or rig up a makeshift tent using canvas and poles. This offered minimal protection from the elements. They were exposed to scorching sun, freezing temperatures, rain, and wind. And if the weather turned nasty, they'd huddle under their wagons or even sleep on the hard ground beneath them, seeking whatever shelter they could find. It made for uncomfortable and often restless nights. Not exactly a recipe for a good night's sleep, and yes, it probably did a number on their backs. Wild West slow fast food. So, you're heading west in your covered wagon. You've packed your belongings, your tools, everything you need for a new life. But what about food? You can't exactly pop into a grocery store on the Oregon Trail. Those prairie schooners and Conestoga wagons were packed tight with household goods, not ready-to-eat meals. That's where the chuck wagon comes in. This was the mobile kitchen of the wagon train, similar in size to a prairie schooner, but designed specifically for food preparation and storage. It was essential for keeping families fed on their long journey. The chuck wagon had a water barrel mounted on the side, providing easy access to fresh water throughout the day. Many also featured a coffee grinder, offering a much-needed caffeine boost after a long day's travel. Underneath the chuck wagon was the possum belly, a storage compartment for firewood and, interestingly, dried cow dung, also known as cow chips. On the treeless plains, cow chips were a valuable fuel source for cooking fires. Each evening, the chuck wagon became the heart of the camp. Families gathered around as the cooks prepared simple meals like beans, bacon, and biscuits. It was a time for sharing stories and building community, a welcome respite after a long day on the trail. The chuck wagon wasn't just about food. It was a symbol of resourcefulness and community, essential for survival and morale on the westward journey. The Wild West gave us more than legends. It gave us unforgettable faces and untold grace. Which story moved you most? Drop your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss our next historical adventure. Thanks for watching.